Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So, we live in a world where I guess AI can compose music, it can clone us, where people live in the metaverse, um, and where really jurisdiction is now becoming a lot more fluid. So, I'm here today with some amazing voices in the industry that I'd like to introduce, but we're going to really interrogate the future of IP. So, let me first introduce you to our speakers. I have Anatola Araba, if that's correct. She is a futurist, artist, and creative, working really at understanding and predicting the future, but also storytelling it. Thank you for joining us. I also have Andrew Staines. He is the Assistant Director General of WIPO, working not only in today's framework for IP, but also where the future may lead us in this sector. So, before we start, can I maybe have a show of hands? Who today knows what IP is? Okay, wait, great. The lawyers better know. Um, who here believes that the IP framework as it is today is ready for the next 10 years? No. Okay, that's interesting. So, panelists, first question for you. What do you think the purpose of IP is? Maybe Anatola, do you want to take that vote?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining for this interesting conversation. For me, when I think about IP, I never really saw myself in the conversation. It seemed like something reserved for IP lawyers or people who are well resourced to invest in these things. And I feel that's how it is for a lot of young people today. And when I say young people, I mean Generation Z, of which I am an elder, as they call it, a geriatric Gen Z. And it was truly through my partnerships with WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, that I began to see it differently through consulting, roundtables, screenings, and most recently, an immersive poetry experience at the United Nations Summit of the Future that reframed what IP means for me today. And it's not as something that, as an independent filmmaker, is more of a nuisance in having to stay up looking for your open sourced music to add to your trailer, but rather more as an infrastructure for imagination and something that can really spearhead innovations. Imagination to me is this pillar that helps us to build worlds, and IP helps to protect those worlds, almost like the atmosphere of our own Earth. Because imagine an asteroid, if you're coming into a planet with an atmosphere, you will be slowed down or dissolve. But without an atmosphere, you just plummet right into the Earth, like the moon, which is why it has so many craters. So IP helps to spearhead this and creates our whole universe of ideas. The last thing is that in preparing for this panel, I started breaking down the real meaning of IP by separating it. There's intellect and property, and our intellect is something we have been passing down since the beginning of humanity, from cave paintings to oral traditions told around the campfire. And property, on the other hand, is something that is created and is now a universal human right to own property, and it's associated with our agency as humans and our autonomy. So, the future of IP, how can we bring those together to create autonomy and agency over our ownership of our own ideas?
Wow, that is profound. I don't. I think I'm going to capitalize on that. What was it? Infrastructure. I'm going to use that. Andrew, what would you define at the heart of IP? What is it? What's its purpose?
Lydia, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I think thank you to the Dubai Future Foundation. I mean, this is for those working in futures and foresight. This is increasingly the World Cup or the Olympic Games of foresight, and so I'm awed and honoured to be here. I'm not sure I could be better. I think the sort of I love the infrastructure for imagination. I think if you look at even if you look at a young child, if you put a young child on the floor with a pile of bricks, within minutes they'll start creating something. they'll be inspired by something, they'll be using something in their imagination, they will build something. It's imagination, innovation, invention, creativity is inherent to who we are as humans. And IP is the tool by which that creativity can survive and thrive in the real market, in the real world. It is the infrastructure to take your imagination right the way through to having real impact.
Thank you. I guess the next big question, I think, in the world we live in today is the ultimate test of originality. Our system was built on the fact that something was novel and original, and that's why it was protected. But Andrew, you had a report that came out in 2025 that really discussed human creativity is becoming really entangled with, I guess, machine learning. So how would we approach the future here in terms of IP and ownership and originality?
Okay. Okay. So to paraphrase Mark Twain very badly, I think rumors of the death of IP are wildly exaggerated. I think the IP framework is surviving. It is evolving. It's IP has faced. If you look at the history of IP, it's faced a whole range of challenges. When you think of when the phonograph, when records came along, people feared for the future of the live music industry. How are people gonna how are musicians going to be rewarded? When the camera came along, people thought, well, the age of painting is over. Why would you paint in an age when you can take a photo? The photocopier. I remember recording cassette tapes as a kid of songs off the radio, and streaming. So the IP system has and is capable of evolving. Um, but this is a foresight seminar, and so we did a report earlier this year. We explored with experts what possible scenarios of the future might look like, and of course, one of the scenarios they painted was very similar to that you highlighted, which is a world in which AI-driven creativity is really prevalent, in a world perhaps where every movie we watch is fine-tuned around our own emotions. You can imagine a film where I like a happy ending in the film, and so therefore the sort of when it shows me a film, it'll come up with the right ending that will send me away with a smile. Someone else that might like a more complex ending will get that. Someone in a bad mood that needs cheering up will get a happy ending, all created by AI. So you can picture these futuristic worlds where AI allows a whole range of fairly bespoke creativity. And I think in that, humans will remain integral. None of that is going to happen without humans. I think, when we talk to experts in our Pathfinders report we produced earlier this year, we looked at copyright, and the views they said, well, in that scenario, copyright would need to evolve to think much more about human intention. What was the intention? What was the thinking behind it? What was the context by which this was put together? Copyright will need to reflect that broader range of factors, as well as, if you like, that moment of fixation when something was put down. The final thought, I think, is one where, for those in the creative world, when we fear the rise of AI, if I put it that way, and then of course AI can provide a whole bunch of useful tools for creators, but I also believe that when you look at, say, music, AI at the moment is still a fabulous replicator. If you feed in classical music, it can probably produce a very compelling and thought-provoking piece of classical music. But can it make the leap from classical music to country music to punk music? I'm not sure it can yet. It's still a replicator. I think that sort of human spark, that human ability to really bring the next revolution, I think will remain pretty central.
That's actually quite interesting. So for our futurists here and thinking ahead, I think you ground yourself in the past by saying its IP's managed to continue in different forms, that it's still been there to protect, or I guess, the infrastructure for creativity. Anatola, maybe it would be helpful for you to give us some words and thoughts, maybe describe a future where IP has grown. Is that something you can talk to? Yeah.
Kind of, yes, definitely. So I always say that AI is closing the gap between imagination and reality. And that today, when you think about IP, a core principle in my work overall is exploring how we can base our technology on nature itself. So I really started considering how intellectual property can similarly be based on nature and what this means and what it looked like. And this kept coming back to shared IP ownership similarly to how nature is rooted in reciprocity and in expanding itself, and the power of that in IP. So this led to a short story around what a future where there's a creative renaissance of innovation due to a reimagined IP framework. So I can share a short snippet from that.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
We call it the Commons of Quantum Curiosity, a living map of human creativity where innovation isn't owned but grown, a flourishing garden of inventions, prototypes, and insights. Because one mind can move mountains, but many minds can move worlds. Here, AI doesn't replace us, it reflects us, closing the gap between imagination and reality and strengthening the way we think, connect, and learn. These commons are designed to be based off of nature to safeguard innovation. Like a living cell, IP becomes our membrane, a thin layer that protects, connects, and allows everything inside to move as one. Creativity becomes the nucleus, our control center where the DNA of innovation expands. Just as cells replicate through mitosis, our shared IP ownership allows our ideas to split and to scale, becoming something much greater than ourselves. And in this way, one invention proliferates into a global web of transformation. So, when I first started thinking of shared ownership, I remember I was in a conversation in Stockholm, Sweden, screening a short film that I made about AI and bias. And one of the students raised their hand and asked me if I had open sourced my film. And I remember thinking, why would I do that? I just spent so much work, time, and effort making this perfect, and I don't know what you're going to do with it. But then I realized the power of these Creative Commons and shared intellectual property, and how space agency like NASA, the importance and meaning of how they open source a lot of their research, their images from their missions, and 3D models so that it can be built upon. And same with large museums and institutions like the Met and the Smithsonian that put images of their collections on the Creative Commons so that everyone has access to this archive of history and artifacts. Just as public spaces are important to cities, the public domain of intellectual property is important for our collective consciousness.
Blown away, honestly. And I think it really nicely ties into the next topic we're talking about, which is, I guess, the new monopoly, right? This common good and the ownership of being like sharing ownership rights, etc. And we saw a lot of change happening with COVID and the pandemic. A lot of things for public health being redesigned. I guess a question maybe to Andrew and then a follow-up for you if you don't mind, Anatola. We built patents in an era where there was, I guess, industrial revolution. We had machines, and now we're kind of moving into this new era of IP. Are we looking at adaptive patterns? Are we looking at a new future, common shared IP analogies, growing IP for a change?
Well, this may not surprise you, but I think my initial first reaction would be, I think in a world where you do have the idea of Creative Commons, of greater sharing, IP becomes more, if not less relevant than ever. Because I think it's very much back to your point, Anatola, which is it's IP fundamentally is about respecting the values and wishes of the creator. If in many cases the creator wants to go away and wants to use their creation to generate an income, to generate an economic return, a stronger society, to create jobs. In many cases, the creator, the innovator, wants the invention to be built on straight away. But what IP allows you to do, it allows you to control that and guide that in the direction so it meets your dream. And so back to your production, It allows you to share it to the extent you watch it, and you can share it very, very widely. But it also says, actually, what do you want to allow people to do with it? Are you happy if people cut it up and use it in a different order? Are you happy if people change the message? You may be, and that's fine, and IP allows that. You may not be. You may think, actually, I wanted to use this to send a message, to send a signal. I don't want someone to come and use it in a way that is fundamentally against the values of what I believe. So I think in this sharing economy, IP is more important, if not less. Now, does it have to change and does it have to evolve? I mean, back to our Pathfinder study and the various scenarios out there. And certainly one of the people we spoke to when we did Pathfinders highlighted, for example, in a world where creative content is shared, if you think of a tweet or Instagram post, I think that the half-life of a tweet or Instagram post is somewhere around 80 minutes. It's sort of after 80 minutes, the readership has dropped to half what it was, and then it dropped. 80 minutes later, it's dropped to half again, and before you know it, it's unless you manage to go viral, it's dropped away. So the vast majority of creative content on these sharing platforms persists for a very, very short period of time. But we have a copyright regime, which is typically life plus 50 or life plus 70 years. And so how do these two behaviors gel together? And so one of the more provocative people we interviewed suggested, for example, that when you think about IP, perhaps we could think about protection terms that are more varied, based on the life of the invention, perhaps based on the technology cycle and so on. So it's one where it's not a WIPO position, it's not a position of a member state of WIPO, but for those involved in foresight and projecting these scenarios, I think there's something in there for us to explore and understand better.
Anything to add to that, or Joy?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I love the essence of being able to build upon all of this knowledge, and it allows us to stand on the shoulder of giants. And it also makes me think of, in our digital age with a lot of AI generated IP, and how even when we're able to generate a very shiny image with a click of a button, or a game or experience, how the thing that is still important is our stories and critical thinking. For example, a timeless story that is Plato's allegory of the cave, which is a story that has existed and stayed relevant today for over 2,000 years. And when you consider a story like this, you probably don't mind whether it's hand-drawn or if it's 3D rendered or a watercolor painting, because this intention and provocation behind it proceeds. So similarly, when we're able to generate so many images endlessly, and mock-ups can look as great as a final result, it's not really about that end result, but rather that process vision behind it. So the future of this IP is certainly in our rigor as well, which is why I always advise young people to be able to train their own algorithms and curate their data sets to have more ownership over that identity. And I believe that once we're able to be more granular in our ownership over the data we use to generate AI projects, that it would lead to more ownership over those projects, and we'd be able to have IP rights over AI generated media. Right now, we're not able to own our IP when we generate AI, and this is why a lot of big Hollywood studios aren't using it, even though they're experimenting with it behind the scenes. But as this evolves and we have more ownership over the data we use, I think that can all change.
Okay, well, let's interrogate the future a bit here. Let's ask some hard questions. Who owns your personal identity? All right, that was my boss. He asked me to put this in this question. I've had a fact from Forbes, or I think it was Gartner. No, it was Gartner. Sorry, that by 2028, 30% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies will have a digital twin. Then we started looking down at 30%, and then we started investigating, and we realized that at the moment, most of the apps use your faces, they use your voice. So the question becomes, who owns your identity as it is today? And what should it look like in the future? Happy for any of you to take that one.
So before ChatGPT was released, there was a lot of fear around how it can be used to bring people back from the dead. Because an example is Chadwick Boseman, the leader, the protagonist of the Black Panther. And when he passed, AI was created to regenerate his likeness. But there was controversy surrounding this. We live in an age, despite advancements in biotechnology and increasing the human lifespan, where our digital presence will outlive us. And it must be considered just as much as our homes and estates of what we will pass down. So, as much as we must be conscious around our digital likeness here while we're alive, in terms of models that work for a campaign and then see their AI likeness in a different campaign they didn't sign up for. But moreover, after I leave this planet, would someone be able to see all of my work online and create a digital twin of myself without my permission or my estate's permission? And this should certainly not ever be able to happen. So we should always have ownership over our digital identity and take that very seriously.
I love that. And I think you referenced something earlier about digital immortality.
Yes, digital immortality is becoming very popular. There's a lot of companies offering this idea of digital immortality, taking all of the data you ever collected and putting that into an avatar using your own image and face that essentially gives you an eternal afterlife in the cloud. And while that can raise concerns, it can also be applied to cultures in a beautiful way. We don't need languages to ever die, and we don't need cultures to ever die, because we can digitally archive them and save these memories forever.
Love that. Andrew, from a WIPO point of view, what's your take?
Life after death, a WIPO view on life after death. It's interesting when you sort of put yourself in the for, as you said earlier, when you want to solve the future, you look to the past. And I think it's interesting when I think of many famous authors, for example, and there is this conversation when they pass often, which is, can you carry on the characters? Can you carry on the storylines? There's often a son or a nephew or a cousin that says, I can carry this on. And then in some cases, the author's left a very clear instruction. Have fun or leave it alone. It's there. And often there's a big debate. So I think there are probably models out there we can look at. I think when you think about personality rights more generally, I mean, it's a huge issue in IP. Again, it's one that's sort of, it's been bubbling along from a number of years. And I think many celebrities have tried to find fixes. And so if you think about many famous sports people, Cristiano Ronaldo has trademarked his very famous Sue celebration. Usain Bolt protected his as well through a trademark. So celebrities have found some ways to try and practically protect elements of their personality. I think what's becoming more profound is, and people are starting to question, is do at some point we need a new type of IP rights for a personality? And I think that's one, again, if I talk to my member states, I get a very wide range of views, but certainly some member states are starting to experiment and try. And so Denmark, for example, passed a law recently, I think it comes into effect at the end of this year, start of next year, which tries to give a right under copyright, under the umbrella of copyright, to try and give a personality right whereby someone can protect their facial expressions, their look, their mannerisms, their tone of voice, can bring that together and use it to control, as you said, what and how people can do. So I think there are models out there. It's starting to evolve. But I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's so fundamental to who we are, but it's important we try and solve it.
I love that. And because, I'd like to keep pushing you guys further. What about IP of thought and consciousness? Now, we're living in a world where people are talking about brain computer chip interfaces, neural links. When we're connecting technology directly to the brain, or we're thinking about thought and consciousness, and there's a lot of speakers talking about that today, by the way. What's the future of IP around that? Oh, Andrew, I know it's a tough one. I apologize.
The IP of consciousness. I think. Okay. So again, there are models out there. Countries have tried. So Chile, for example, 3 or 4 years ago, Chile introduced a new neuro right, the right of people in the same way that if you were to, there's many international laws and treaties against the trafficking of organs, for example. Why should your thoughts be different? Why should you have a fundamental human right to own your own identity? You can go right back. I mean, this is something that's existed for a long time, a fear that's existed for a long time. You can go back to thought crime in George Orwell's Thought Crime to sort of see how fundamental this is to us. So I think governments are starting to think about it. How can you protect it? What can you do? I think then you sort of to expand a little bit, you sort of get into the kind of actually people talk increasingly around the sort of mind-machine interfaces, the computers that can plug into your thought processes, and I think this will throw up on a whole higher level many of the questions and issues we talked about before around AI, for example. AI, at what point does human creativity stop, and which point does the computer take over? What do you do when there's a black box method, if you like, but you can't quite explain? And so even many sort of human rights and broader issues which are very, very important, but even on the pure question of IP, it's going to pose some very profound questions. Fixation in copyright. There's that moment in copyright where to protect it, you have to put it down somewhere. You have to get it, and that's the moment when your copyright kicks in, if you like. How does that work when creativity could be, if you again to play with scenarios, if creativity is a mind-machine interface where it's iterative, where it's going back, where you're not quite sure there's a final product, and some of it comes from your consciousness, but perhaps some of it doesn't. Where's the point of fixation? How does copyright work in a world where creativity is more iterative and more continuous?
Adding on to this exploration, I know that researchers in UT Austin had been exploring large language models that are able to decode brain waves, essentially moving towards the reality of reading the human mind and what happens when our thoughts and the brain waves that are triggered in experiences we go through are able to be transparent and decoded. But similarly, just as IP is the infrastructure of imagination, it really brings to question to me who owns the imagination, since what we imagine is created through what we experience, our memories, and what we were told in a story. And our culture today has so many stories that do showcase grim and dystopian views about the future, which leads to a lot of passivity and a lack of hope. Today, 80% of Americans don't believe that their children will be economically better off than they are. And the majority of a UK study found people don't feel they have the autonomy to shape their governments or democracy. So if we're able to control these inputs that are creating this imagination, we would also be able to shape a more hopeful consciousness, because who owns the imagination owns the future, and we're all here to explore how to foster better futures.
Look, I think at this point, these are the questions we want to ask ourselves when we look at the future. And these are really insightful, commentary around the topics. And we'll never have a consensus or an answer today. I think these are meant to be thought-provoking. But if we move from Earth, we go up to space, because why not? I think one of the things we've been looking at is 7,500 patents recently filed referencing space technologies as an example. And yet I think there's no consensus on who owns IP in the orbit, or, when it's created. Maybe there is, I might be wrong, but as far as I understand, there hasn't been any consensus there. And if we're looking at fluid economies and digital, the borders are kind of being more blurred now. What would you say, should we apply earthbound rules? Should we apply earthbound rules to space? Should we look at it more differently? Would love to have your insights on that. Do you want to go first?
You have art in space, so therefore you. I think. I can't. I cannot. I cannot veto. I can give legal principles and ideas.
Fine.
But I can't be art in space. Anatola, please.
Please do tell the audience.
Tell the story.
Yes.
Tell the story.
Thank you. So in 2022, I made a 3D animated short film called Afro Algorithms. It told the story of the world's first AI leader who found missing information was missing from her data bank and the need for diverse data in algorithms. And in 2024, the project made history by being sent to space on NASA's first moon mission since 1972. And the process was that it was accepted into an innovative museum that collected artworks and cultural artifacts and uploaded it into an indestructible nickel disc that was bolted to the side of a rocket ship, the Odysseus lunar lander by Intuitive Machines, that was sent to the moon and landed. And this, considering that this project is a form of IP in space and inhabiting the culture of space, it leads me to wonder how IP can shape space culture. Because I've also spoken with NASA around how they're considering telling our story of living and working on the moon as they plan for the Artemis 1 through 5 missions, which result in a permanent lunar space station, as well as a permanent lunar base in the South Pole. When it comes to space, there's engineering and important considerations such as how to breathe and survive. And then there's also how we'll feel up there and the kind of quality of life that astronauts will have, and entertainment and culture and creativity is all a part of that. So when I think about the IP that will shape the future of space, I really hope that it's a vibrant one and a diverse one and one that is really creative.
I mean, yes, I'm blown away, Andrew.
I'm blown away too. But to frame the question is your piece of art protected as it heads off into space by IP law? I think the answer, if you'll excuse the pun, is it's a bit of a black hole there at the moment in terms of IP in outer space. It's been a topic that sort of it's one of these cyclical topics. It was, I think, space travel, I think, had its age with the first missions, and then I think as humans sort of focused back on Earth, it died down. And again, with the increased desire to make humankind an interplanetary species, you see these conversations bubbling up again. The conversation around IP protection in space. In general, there's not much out there. I think the model that's probably most interesting is the International Space Station. That's the one that jumps out to me. So the International Space Station is, as you probably know, a sort of series of modules that's glued together, and each module is a different economy. A different economy is running each module, and so the overall project is a very extremely collegial scientific project to keep this thing orbiting the Earth. But the parties have agreed, and some have incorporated it into their law, that inventions, creations on the ISS are protected as if they were in the territory of the country back on Earth. So there are sort of models out there, albeit more bilateral, plurilateral understanding type models. Do we have an answer to the question when it's a Japanese invention on a spaceship launched from Florida that's owned by an Indian company, et cetera, et cetera? Do we really understand where ownership lies? I'm not sure we do. I think we've got some work ahead of us.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on that? Then if you had to reimagine the future, right, for space and new frontiers and, genetics, and people are talking about who owns my molecules, who owns my DNA. Is there any ideas you have around that? Is there anything where you, not necessarily wipe our hat, but what you see the future of IP being? Is it more shared, common? Do you build upon each other's work, or do you still try and apply Earth's rules a little bit in those areas that are unknown yet?
I think again, I mean, it's hard to be Earth. We've got a lot to learn from. I think thinking of this summit this week, I think for me what's really interesting, and I think the in a way is a call to action for futurists, for those professionals in foresight, which is when you look at these issues historically, we've traditionally put them in baskets, and we've looked at an issue and said this is an IP issue. That's for the IP team to deal with. Bioengineering, that's an ethical issue. Send it to the ethics team. Your personal DNA privacy. We have a data privacy officer. Let's send it to the DPO and let them solve it. Cybersecurity. How do we protect all this stuff? The legal team. They've all very much sort of worked in silos, and the issues have sort of landed with one team, and it's been theirs to own and deal with. And I think when you look at issues like biochemistry, space, even rights around personal image consciousness, I think that world no longer fits. And I think that we need a fusion of all of those skills. The answer is not going to come from the law or ethics or the technology side alone. It's going to have to be a fusion of all three. And I think this is why events like this are so brilliant, because they bring people together, and perhaps futures and foresight people is that community that can help really drive and enable that fusion.
So I'm mindful of time, so we'll wrap it up. I just have one final question before we do. I guess, Anatola, what's one thing you'd like the audience to walk away with, one truth around IP?
Yes, my key takeaways is the power of shared ownership and consciousness over our digital identities as extensions of our real identities, and the power of imagination as the fuel of innovation and the driver of what will be this new innovation economy.
Andrew, IP in 2050.
I think the lesson for me is IP is not about institutions. It's not about law. It's about people. It's about people. It's about our dreams. It's about how do you protect, enable, and support people with a dream. And I think that will continue. That'll continue into the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years. The world will change, but providing we keep that mindset, the original goal of IP, I think we'll be well placed.
Thank you both for your time. Thank you, audience.